University of Louisville understands that their students come from diverse backgrounds with aspirations, drives, and needs to match. With more than 50 online programs in areas like business, education, social work, engineering, and more, UofL provides students with a multitude of career advancing options and flexible coursework. Students can complete their coursework from the comfort of their home or on the go via mobile apps. Learn more at louisville.edu/online. That's louisville.edu/online.
From the University of Louisville's Delphi Center for Teaching and Learning.
And the University of Central Florida's Center for Distributed Learning.
I'm Kelvin Thompson.
And I'm Tom Cavanaugh.
And you are listening to Topcast, the Teaching Online Podcast. Hey, Tom.
Hey, Kelvin, that was very enthusiastic. I congratulate you on your enthusiasm.
Well, we've been chit-chatting before hitting record for a while, and I've had 7 cups of coffee now.
Yeah, I was going to say, I see you sipping. It must be the caffeine kicking in. So
yes.
What kind of coffee is that caffeine coming from? Pray tell.
Well, Tom, my coffee today is a single origin Costa Rica and was purchased recently in person from Dunn Brothers Coffee in Minneapolis, Minnesota, which was right down the street from an in-person conference we both attended. I saw you there. Hey, one of the hallmarks of the conference was at least one gathering, at least one of the hallmarks for me anyway, was one gathering that leveraged the value of safe space dialogue in a small group setting. So I thought all of that context fit well with today's topic, and so therefore recommended this coffee as my attempt at a connection. My coffee's tasty. Curious if you think there's a connection to be had, but I want to know what you're drinking and if you got a connection.
I am drinking coffee as well. I do not have a connection, and it is not caffeinated. It's my afternoon decaf. So, while you're all wired, I may be getting drowsy.
Okay.
At some
Stay
point.
awake. Stay awake.
I will do my best.
Okay, that's good.
But with that kind of enthusiasm, how could I nod off? I do think that there's something there that I'm digging. So you mentioned in-person conference. You mentioned you bought it in person, and that something about safe spaces. And those are topics that kind of come up in the interview that we're going to talk about today. So I think you were hitting some notes in the melody from the interview.
Yeah, now that's exactly what I was going for. And I because I can't, I'm a little compulsive this way. We've actually had Dunn Brothers coffee before from that very same place, because I got it the last time I was in that very same venue for another event, and we had a very lovely, as I recall, single origin Mexico about 6 years ago. I just looked it up to see when it was. So I walked in the doors of the hotel where this conference was, and I'm like, I have been here before. I didn't know it until right then. Dunn Brothers Coffee. Yeah, so Tom, you recently interviewed our colleague Melissa Lobel. Melissa currently being the Chief Academic Officer at Instructure, the makers of the Canvas LMS. And Melissa has held several other roles at Instructure over the past 10 years or so, and previously, before that, she served at a variety of other ed tech companies and has also taught at and held positions at several higher ed institutions over her 20-year career. Melissa holds a master's degree in educational policy from Teachers College, Columbia University, and an MBA from Columbia Business School. I like Melissa. I've known her, as you know, for quite a while. Haven't seen her, haven't talked to her in a while. Say hey next time you talk to her. Hi, Melissa. Is there anything you'd like to say about the interview before we cut to it?
Not a lot. I think it stands on its own. I really enjoy talking to Melissa. I find her very thoughtful. I've gotten to know her in a different context. We both serve on the board of directors for One Ed Tech, and she's been the board chair, and have just a lot of respect for her and the work that she does. And from kind of her perch, kind of looking out across the space as somebody who's kind of a vendor, I think she's got an interesting perspective.
Well, through the modern technological marvel that is podcast time travel, here is your interview, Tom, with Melissa Lobel.
So, Melissa, thank you so much for being on Topcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's a real honor.
Oh, great. Well, we are really thrilled to have you. So you've just finished your big user conference, InstructureCon conference, and I've been kind of following along on social media, and you had some reflections that sort of just caught my attention about kind of the state of ed tech and online learning kind of in general. And I just, now that it's sort of fresh, I thought that maybe you could share some of those reflections with the Topcast audience. So if it's all right with you, I've grabbed a few of your comments and I'm going to ask you about them, and maybe you can kind of elaborate if that's all right.
Oh, it sounds amazing. Would love it.
Okay. So the first one was, you've noticed a passion for student success and the true humanity exuded by every educator. I love that. So what did you mean by that?
Yeah, I think it's so important to be thinking about the human in both the learner that we're interacting with, as well as that teacher facilitator guide in their journey. And that's becoming even more and more important as we have deeper conversations about AI. And what role does AI play versus what role does that human connection? And this has been the first year I've really seen this surface again. I think during COVID, we saw a little bit of this about talking about, remember the person behind the interactions. But we're seeing it so much more, and the care that people are bringing to the table is really impressing me, especially as we think about not just that learner and that teacher facilitator guide connection, but also the connection in the broader education community. There's a bit of a, we're all in this together, that I'm really feeling more than I have in a long time.
That's great. Yeah, especially because COVID was so formative for so many of us, and so traumatic in many ways, that, to kind of turn a page and frame what we're kind of entering into positively, as opposed to talking about, kind of all of the stuff we all dealt with through COVID, feels kind of refreshing and exciting.
I totally agree. It's not, well, we have lots of challenges, and I imagine we'll get there too. We've got lots of challenges in education right now, but I think there's more positive hope than there ever has been before. And people aren't just focused on what are we doing to rally together against a challenge like a pandemic, a global pandemic, but they're rallying together about, hey, we all see a future. How do we actually parse through what we know and what we don't know to build a future together? I'm really seeing that shift, as opposed to, again, this reactive mode that we're all in, which is also helpful, right? It takes a village to do both, react and be proactive. But I like the shift to proactive. Yeah,
well, I like that, as opposed to, that's a great way of framing it. So instead of marshaling forces to defend against something, it's like, well, let's go after something that we all want instead. That different ways, like glass half full, glass half empty, I guess. All right, so the next one is the commitment of every attendee to lasting, meaningful, relationship-first change in education and society. So you kind of brought society in, and maybe that's where some of those challenges are. But again, it's sort of this human relationship. I assume that's what you're getting at there?
Yeah, definitely. I think AI is surfacing this. I think we're also seeing an acknowledgement that we're a learner in our whole life. whether it's in a traditional environment like a K-12 or even a higher education degree environment, or whether it's in a non-traditional environment like I'm learning something with my organization I work for, or I'm going back and doing certificates or continuing education, or whether it's like purely informal. I'm learning a hobby and, I'm watching YouTube videos to do it. I think all of that combination of experiences alongside AI has surfaced up. There's a lot of content out there. There's a lot of places to go learn how to do something. But that doesn't get us where we need to go alone. We have to think about the relationships that we're building with other humans in that. I think about my own hobbies. It's a great example of, I can learn all of that in a silo but it's really what those moments I have with someone else that help me solidify, apply, deepen, sort of lock in what I've learned in all of these content venues. And I think that relationship-driven approach is something else we're now starting to see people talk about. It's not just about what does technology do to make learning easier and more accessible, but it's also what do relationships do to make that learning more equitable and to create foundation, not just for what you may be doing professionally, but how you're impacting your own communities and ultimately society.
Cool. The next one is one that really resonated with me. It's something that I get out of conferences and when I have the opportunity to talk to peers. So you kind of highlighted the willingness of people to share experiences in both formal and casual settings without fear or trepidation. And one of the things that I really value about going to a conference, even more so than like going to sessions and things anymore, I sort of feel like I've reached a point where I get more out of like the hallway conversations, the coffee, sitting at the bar with somebody who's got my job at another institution. And I can just be like, hey, I tried this thing and it just didn't work. And you don't have to worry about being judged. And they're like, I know, right? Here's what I ended up doing. I assume that's kind of what you're implying there. Maybe no fear of sharing some failures, perhaps.
Yeah, that is exactly what I'm implying. And one of the things you mentioned that we just came off our big annual conference, and as Chief Academic Officer, I get to do some really fun work within Instructure. I get to work with thought leaders just in the broader human development space. And how do we think about growing our own understanding of ourselves and helping our organizations grow? So I got to interview as part of our conference last week, Dr. Mary Murphy. She's out of Indiana University. She's also done work with Stanford. And she was actually one of not a student, but she worked under Carol Dweck and talked a lot and did a lot around growth mindset. And she's now taken this work and applied it to organizational or environment growth mindset. It's not just within ourselves to have a growth mindset as opposed to perhaps a fixed mindset, but we can create organizational cultures in which that growth mindset exists. So things like, and I had to step back and reflect, I've always said I'm not good at science. That is a fixed mindset. I need to be thinking about me as, I actually can learn science, and there's a growth approach to that. Well, if you take that simple thing and you apply that into an organization or a culture, think about a classroom. How many times do we do that and don't realize we do that to students? We help them sort of identify who they are, and we don't realize that those moments can be lasting. Well, the same thing happens in organizations. Are we creating cultures in organizations in which we're telling people, don't share your mistakes, only come with perfect? Well, that's a very fixed mindset. That's not emphasizing the growth or the development together. And if I think, the pandemic brought so much challenge, but one thing it did while we're all facing that challenge is it did teach us to get in the boat together and face that challenge. Some of that has stuck in education. I've been really inspired by the number of bar conversations or coffee conversations where people are actually willing to start with, here's what I did and it didn't work. And let's have a conversation about how do we all grow from that, as opposed to hide that or be concerned about that's impact on my own professional or personal growth or community growth. So I think this, similar to the human piece and the relationship piece, right? We're also seeing a shift where it's okay to be growth oriented. It's okay to be human, authentic, and share the challenges and the problems and the mistakes we make with one another, because that's actually how we all learn and how we lift up education together.
That's such an important point. This idea that you got at about culture and like within our own organizations, trying to foster that growth mindset. Because if you don't feel safe failing, you're never going to stretch, you're never going to innovate, you're never going to kind of go to that next level because you're going to just be, worried about getting in trouble or losing my job or whatever the case might be. And it may not even be true, but some people, create those narratives for themselves, and you really have to create that culture that counters that.
Oh, yeah. Think about the innovations that lost in that case, right? Because if you've got people that are afraid, and I've been in places and in meetings and in settings where this has happened, nobody wants to speak up because they don't want to either admit that something went wrong because they're fear of judgment, or they're afraid to bring their innovative ideas because everybody will take them apart. And that's sort of the culture that's been created. You never innovate that way. And that's just sad to me but it's happening everywhere. And I think in education, we can really think about how to address that as well in our classrooms, in the organizations. We can be all living, breathing examples of, because our mission is growth in so many ways. Let's show that and help, students and everybody in the organization understand that that's a key part of our mission.
So let's talk about a different kind of growth. This was another reflection that you had. You observed an emphasis on operational efficiency and leadership, particularly the need to scale and lead through significant change with limited resources. I think every single person listening or watching this can relate to demands being put on them with limited resources. And this question of scale is one that obviously we think about a lot here at UCF, but we're not alone. So I wonder if you could maybe elaborate on that a little bit.
Yeah, I'd be happy to. So one of the first things, I stepped into this new role in January, and one of the first things that myself and my team did was we surveyed the landscape of what is everyone talking about and why, particularly in higher education, but in education in general. And this one came up, just like you said, everywhere. And that it was both operational efficiency in that, how do we use what we have to its best degree? It was also operational efficiency and how do we make the right choices about what new we need to bring in and what we need to exit. So it was a piece of that. And that includes people, right? A lot of new people coming in, people transitioning out. And then it always had the lens. When we talked to folks, we read research, it always had this lens of scale. So I'll give an example. Lots of leadership changes in education, lots at the very senior level. How do you bring those leaders on board to understand the state of education today and into the future? They may not come with that, or they may not come with it in the context of the institution. So how do you do that, like human development piece? Then how do you think about the right technologies that you select to support like the learning experience at your institution, or even just the internal experiences? Well, how do you pick the right ones? And then how do you make sure that work can scale? Because we can all do this in minor settings, right? We can all do high impact, one-off professional development work. That is not scalable. We can all go buy all the technologies we need, and blow our budgets out of the water, but that also doesn't enable us to scale meaningfully these sort of operational efficiencies or optimization that we're trying to do. And I think it's that scale piece in particular, that lens that really people were wearing, that's different today than it was 10 years ago. Because we've all had budget. I faced them in the institutions I've worked in. There's budget challenges. You're always doing more with less. That's part of being an educator, I've decided. It has to be in your DNA. But now it's also, I've got to do more with less, and I've got to make sure that scales to a much larger population, a possibly remote population, and a very diverse population than I ever have had to be able to do before.
Yeah, I always say I could do pilots all day long.
Yep.
Pilots in many ways are easy. They're fun. It's like, okay, taking it to scale is a whole different set of challenges.
Completely. And I'm not sure all of the technologies out there, all the vendors serving education, I'm not sure everybody's thinking about true scale. I think they're thinking about scale in a year or two, but they're not thinking about what happens when this really takes off and an entire institution or collections of institutions or systems choose to use this. That's entirely different. So that's building to think about scale, and not just building the technology, but building the architecture of the design in such a way that it's going to scale. We've seen this happen through acquisitions that were incredible, but weren't prepared to scale, and we've had to step back and scale them. And I'm sure that's happened with, I know you all do some really incredible development work. I'm sure that's the same thing. How do we start from the beginning with a mind to scale while we're trying to build the most efficient systems?
Yeah. Well, as we're thinking about the future, let me go to your last question, which is sort of, or your last comment, I should say, that kind of gets to that. And you've already mentioned AI, but your comment was the future of learning. What will learning look like for learners, from how they use AI to how they take agency over their lifelong learning pathways? And it's funny, this is something that Kelvin and I talk a lot about kind of off mic. And we may do an episode on something like this in the near future. So I'd love to get your take on kind of unpack that a little bit when you're talking about lifelong learning and the future and AI and everything that we're kind of in the middle of right now.
Yeah, it's so interesting. As we start to vision the future, there's a part of me that thinks 3 years from now, I'm going to have my own personal bot, and I'm going to, and it's going to tell me, hey, based on the experiences you've had in the last 6 months, you need to actually go watch this video because you need to understand more here. Or, you're doing a lot of work in this area. Do you feel comfortable? Like, all of your calendar items are mentoring. Do you feel comfortable? Or here's some recommendations for some programs where you can go develop your mentoring skills. So I think about that in my own life, but I think about, somebody starting out their career, whether it's come straight from a K-12 experience and it's a vocational or technical career they're going straight into, or it's coming out of a degree. I think we're going to be so informed around our daily practice and work that's going to extend to recommendations or ideas or suggestions for how we can continue to develop ourselves. And the part that I think is really important about agency is not only do we need to ingest that and be aware of that, but we need to control and shape what that looks like. So how do we interact with AI tools and with other humans, of course, but really, how do I interact with AI tools in a way that I am making my choice, and I'm making my choices based on all of the really important input that those tools are gathering about me? Like, that's really, that's a feedback exchange in a lot of ways. I was just talking to someone that I'm mentoring earlier today, and they were telling me about some challenges that they're having around, giving other people feedback, and how do I do that cross culture? Well, gosh, if that transcript had been read, and immediately after, right, there's a collection of curated ideas for where can you go build those skills. That's powerful. I have agency. I'm controlling. I'm aware of where I want to grow or develop. And now I'm using the tools around me to be able to help guide me. And then think about the role of education in that. So how do you ensure you have the right kinds of offerings, the right kinds of opportunities and touch points? How do you help learners understand how to take that agency? Because so many learners don't know how to do that. And how do you become part of that universe for them where they're at the center of choosing their own path?
That's awesome. Melissa, thank you so much for sharing these insights with us, kind of from your perch, overlooking a lot of different parts of the kind of whole higher ed and K-12 kind of ed tech space. I think our audience will really enjoy hearing that. So thank you again.
Thank you so much for having me. Such a fun conversation.
Well, Tom, that was your interview with Melissa Lobel.
Yeah, like I said, I always like talking to Melissa, and I thought it was an interesting conversation, kind of just listening to her kind of post-conference reflections and insights, and just kind of trying to tie up some threads that she found laying around. And I thought that's always a good thing to do. It's an instructional strategy, right? Like, hey, write a reflection on this assignment and tell me what you learned. So yeah, in that sense, I thought it was a really interesting conversation.
Yeah, we'll include the link to that post. I found it in the show notes. And to your point about it's a good modeling. It doesn't have to be fancy, right? I mean, or long, exhaustive. I mean, it was well stated. I'm not disparaging it, but it doesn't have to be like a tome, an essay, right? And sharing that, right? But I got to tell you, I told you this before we hit record. I really enjoyed listening to your interview. The time really went by. It was just, I don't know, it had a bright tone to it. I thought, you all say these words, I think, in the midst of the interview, but I felt like it had like a hopeful outlook about the current time and the future of education. You know, I just thought all that was really just nice.
Yeah, one of the things that, I mean, consistent with that, one of the things that I took away from the conversation was we've come out of this high stress pandemic sort of mindset for a couple of years, it feels like, and then higher ed's been under all of these pressures and lower enrollments in a lot of places and budget challenges, and just like the whole space feels like it's been under a lot of strain. But she framed it as we're coming out of a reactive mode, and it's an opportunity, rather than like responding to something defensively, to look forward to something that we want to accomplish proactively and go for it. And it feels like a pivot of sorts, like I don't know, we turn the page in many ways. So in that regard, I think it's you know, really, really helpful.
Yeah, I think that's good, Tom. That's right. I mean, that whole idea of, you know, kind of a moving toward something, moving toward the horizon, a challenge, I think you all said. I think that's good. And just the overall theme of, I mean, I swear we've used the word human so much on this podcast in the last year or so, but that was such a thing, right? Humanity, personhood, right? Especially in the technology mediated and AI assisted present and future. I think all that was good.
Theme. Yeah, definitely a theme that she observed amidst a technology-oriented conference where it feels like AI is being talked about everywhere. Every conference I go to, it's AI all day, every day, all the time. And I'm not saying we don't need that, we do. But what she highlighted, though, was this observation of the humanity in the midst of that. And I thought, well, that's interesting. And that reoccurred through all of her kind of, you know, insights and observations.
Yeah. I will say I was struck with a couple of things in particular. In that vein especially, she talked about in a content-rich, AI-assisted learning context, the value of the human relationship via conversation, feedback, input. And I thought that was interesting. Like, that's a thread I'd kind of like to pull myself for a while. I need to ponder that some more, but I thought that's interesting. It reminds me of Jared Stein saying something in our last year's wrap-up episode about AI interaction versus human interaction and how are we going to judge those things. I thought that was salient.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely, there's a AI kind of guru guy I kind of follow on social media. And one of the things he says is kind of like, you know, let the AI do what the AI does, but make sure that the human's doing what the human does, and kind of don't cross those boundaries, because there's things only humans can do, and there's things that AI can do that you don't have to do because it's made for that. Yeah. But, you know, that means that there is a unique space for the human in all of this. And it actually, in talking to Melissa, it put me in mind of a previous episode we did, an interview with Michelle Pacansky-Brock, who, you know, her thing is the humanity in what we do.
It's true.
Yeah.
Humanize Ed, humanize Edie.
Humanize,
yeah, for sure.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah, that is. That was the mid-April 2020 episode, as I recall.
Look at you. Yeah, man, that's That's right at the start of the pandemic.
A blast from the past.
Mid-April 2020.
It is a good episode. We'll put a link in the show notes. I think that's right. And then the other thing that stood out, I thought was interesting. You all didn't get into a lot, but this idea of the importance of systems and scale. And I jotted a little note to myself, maybe, like we were just talking about technology, maybe that idea of design, or even the metaphor of architecting, even more so than technology. How thinking through what's it take to systematize and scale. I thought that was really important. Another human dimension, maybe we might say.
Yeah, agreed. Yeah, so I really enjoyed talking to Melissa, and thank her for being on the podcast. You think I can throw in a plug?
Oh, please, plug away.
So, dear listener / watcher, we ask that you please rate and review this podcast. It's so easy to do. Wherever you're accessing this episode, look around. You're going to find some place in the left or the right or the top or the bottom to click a star rating, or to write a sentence or so of endorsement about how wonderful you find Kelvin's coffee and recommendations. We would very much appreciate it, as this is really an important way that new listeners find us, and if they're looking for this kind of content. And we do hear all the time, I do, from various people I see at conferences who find out, like, oh, you're the podcast guy, like you're my network, because they're like at an institution that is maybe, doesn't have a big team, but there's not a lot of peers that they have doing this kind of work. And they do find some community in this community, and we want to make sure that they can find us. And this is one way that they can do that.
Absolutely. No, that's great. That's great. You want to put us on the runway, as we like to say?
Let's. So, as much as higher education is increasingly technology assisted, we wouldn't have jobs, really, if it wasn't for that. But even more so, we need to lean into exploring how the human being is central to the value that we offer through higher education.
Yeah, no. Well said. That's right. Right on. No, that's great. So good having Melissa asynchronously join us. Thanks, Melissa. And so good to see you. In a couple weeks back when we saw each other in person when I got this coffee, and so good to see you today, Tom. And until next time for Topcast, I'm Kelvin.
And I'm Tom.
See ya.